Molly says, can you speak to the realm of spiritual study? Looking at questions like what is God, what is real, who am I, etc. I'm often so focused on my psychological and physical challenges that I can find myself rather lost in that. I would like to hear your or others' experience in the area of spiritual study and what has been helpful. Did you have a regular practice of spiritual study, like you might have a regular time for exercise or meditation? Yes. Okay. So spiritual study, if we look at it in the different types of yoga, we have the yoga of knowledge, right? It's jnana yoga. There's bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, which is emotional, love for God. There's the yoga of service, karma yoga, serving others. There's the yoga of the intellect. So some people will see the yoga of the intellect and feel that this means I have to study the text, right? Study the text, memorize them, know each verse, everything like that. That's part of it, but it's much, much deeper than that. Um, it's the intellect of self-knowledge, not just intellectual knowledge, but self-knowledge. So, mind-based practices, like Molly was saying, questions like, who am I, right? What is God? Koans in Zen, what is the sound of one hand clapping, right? Ramana Maharshi's question, who am I? Like, who am I, right? So in my path, this was actually the beginning of, I shouldn't say the beginning, but a very early stage in my spiritual process was contemplating these questions to a very, very high degree. I know I'm not this mind. I know I'm not this body. What am I? Who am I? Eventually, that question is not just an intellectual question like asking, what time is it? That question is a tool and it's a device that actually takes you energetically to the core of being itself, to the core of consciousness. And in that core, the question is dissolved. And you don't have an answer. You are the answer. You become the answer. And that answer, which is, wait, I mean, put words to it, pure being, you are God, your spirit, your consciousness, you're the self, no self, whatever it is, that begins to first permeate the mind. So the idea of you taking yourself to be the ego completely falls away. And you recognize that you're the self, you're the spirit, your awareness. The mind falls away, and that causes, at least in my awakening, that was a top-down awakening. So that opened up the mind and then triggered a top-down awakening where the rest of my body had to now catch up with this realization of who I really was as spirit, as consciousness, which then triggered the rest of the Kundalini in my body. So for some, they may have a bottom-up awakening where they work through the body, healing and releasing all of these things, eventually coming to the same conclusion that they were never this body, were never this mind. They were always the spirit, always the consciousness, always the divine, always awareness. And that's where the culmination of the Kundalini awakening process takes place in the head. For some, it happens top down, for some, bottom up. Is this a useful practice to ask, who am I? What is true? To contemplate, what is the nature of reality? These types of sort of mind-based practices, very, very powerful to make significant shifts, as well as to establish a high degree of a witnessing state of consciousness within which we can abide and allow the emotional purging to take place as we witness without getting involved. So very, very powerful. Not everybody's inclined to go in that direction at a certain point on their journey. But if you happen to be, definitely incorporating that into your sadhana, into your practice, which means just, sitting down and contemplating, who am I? Who am I? To whom does this thought arise? To whom are these questions, these emotions arising, these questions arising? Who? Who am I? And like I said, it's not just a question, it's a powerful, energetic tool, which if you just sit with it to a high intensity, with a very high degree, it's like a prayer. An answer comes, and it's very, very powerful. So we can incorporate that into our practice if it feels right for us. Caveat is that many do practice this question and they get the answer, I'm pure consciousness. I'm not this body, I'm not this mind, I'm pure consciousness. And then they begin to neglect this body, right? I don't have to deal with any of the trauma in the body. I'm not the body. But that's half baked. It's halfway up the mountain. Consciousness holds the body, and it's through the body that we get to even experience this idea of being consciousness. So without the body, you wouldn't even been able to ask that question. And so many people will consider paths like Zen, and they'll say, well, they just sit and meditate and ask these questions, these koans. They don't know anything. They don't talk about Kundalini or anything, but even in Zen, they do acknowledge a sort of energetic, fiery component in the body. It's not talked about openly too much. In Zen, they have very strong emphasis on meditating and working and cooking and cleaning and walking. It's because they're paying attention to the body in an indirect way. Ramana Maharshi, he asked the question, who am I? And people think, oh, this guy was all about the intellect. He was all about mind, jnana yoga. He only asked, who am I? Well, he also walked around Arunachala, which is a mountain. He walked around it, countless times. He spent time in a cave meditating, allowing his nervous system in the body to be saturated with Shakti. And in fact, if you go to Ramana Maharshi's Wikipedia page, the beginning of his journey, he describes, it is described about him that a current moved through his body. He thought he was dying, or he experienced a sort of death, and that triggered his awakening. A current, what does that sound like? It sounds like energy. It sounds like Kundalini, Shakti. The current moved through him, and then he became, of course, fuel to go and contemplate this question very deeply. So we want to have a balance of both the intellectual understanding, the mind-based level understanding, the jnana yoga level understanding of who am I, what is true, as well as reverence for this body as well. And all of the great traditions, masters, saints, sages, operated in this balanced way. Modern day, we have a lot of people focusing only on the body, or we have a lot of people focusing only on the mind. And it seems like they're two different camps, two different paradigms, but they're actually not. So I'll wrap it up there. I know that was a bit of a long response. It's a very important part of my journey, because when this was happening to me on my mind, I was dismissive of the body, completely dismissive. I didn't want to look at the body or look at any of the pain or the trauma and all that kind of stuff. But eventually I had to with Kundalini.